Hey everybody, KMO here. Got a live stream going, and I am joined by Zoom from, let's see if I can get the name of this town right. Is it Toxinoxie, Kansas?
Tonganoxie. Very close.
So this is my friend Brent Ragsdale, and Brent does a radio show on a community radio station in Kansas City, Missouri. Is it Missouri or Kansas?
Missouri.
Missouri, okay.
Yep.
And it's called Eco Radio KC, and you can find it at kkfi.org. And Brent sent me, he's been sending me some email recently. He listens to my podcast. And Brent, why don't I let you basically set the stage? What are we talking about?
Well, I think we're talking about attitudes towards climate change, I guess. Mm-hmm. And other things. It's not just climate change, the whole situation. I kind of hate to see everything reduced down to the parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I think there's a lot more issues at play than just that, but that's a big one.
That's carbon blindness, when you can think about nothing except that number, parts per million. Everything else is subordinate. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess in some emails, you told me to, you kind of cautioned me about the difference between fear mongering and being, what's the term I'm looking for? Showing what's going on.
Raising awareness.
Yeah. I'm drawing a blank on my verbiage. I'm much better with my emails, that where I get a chance to think them through.
Well, let me recap from my perspective a little bit. I think at some point on a podcast, I said that from my perspective, living in fear of an abstraction is a sin. That one, as soon as you understand that you're living in fear and that you have the means to address that fear yourself, within yourself, not to fix the thing out there in the world that you think you should be afraid of, but to actually quell the fear. If you don't do that, if you just let the fear go, if you feed it, if you just revel in it, then to me, that's really obnoxious. I mean, that is so obnoxious because the downstream effects, particularly if you spread that fear to other people make stupid decisions when they're afraid. And this is an opinion that I formed shortly after 2001, when so many people, particularly then and in the Red Tribe, were deliberately amping up their own fear. They were afraid of terrorism. And, the government, the media was more than happy to stoke those fears. And what did we get? I mean, what did we all just, go along with based on that fear in the wake of the 9/11 terror attacks? I mean, we still have troops in Afghanistan 20 years later. My oldest son was born in 2000. His whole life, we have been at war because of the events of that day and because of the fear that people reveled in. It's exciting to be afraid. So that's where I'm coming from with this, fear is the mind killer. Obviously that's from Dune, that's Frank Herbert, but I fully subscribe to it. Fear is the mind killer. It is the ability to master one's fear, which separates humans from animals. Animals can't do that. Animals are afraid, they respond to the fear. Humans have the capacity to ask themselves a question. I feel like I'm afraid, but am I in immediate physical danger? If I'm not in immediate physical danger, this fear is of no use to me. If I am in immediate physical danger, if there's a lion right here or a tiger that's going to kill me, then yeah, a whole bunch of adrenaline right now is going to do me good. I can run faster. Maybe I can shout at it. Maybe something good might come of that fear, or I might get eaten anyway and just die afraid. But if the threat is not immediate, if it's not a physical threat in your immediate environment, then fear is poison. I mean, literally, in your system, chemically, it's toxic, but also in the more metaphorical way that people talk about toxic masculinity or toxic language or whatever. I mean, this is something that I consider to be toxic, fear. And you think that climate change is a very serious thing, and I won't put words in your mouth beyond that. What's your response to, doesn't matter how serious climate change is, if you are allowing fear to run rampant in your nervous system, you are doing harm to yourself and your community, and you should stop it?
Well, I get what you're saying, especially in the short term, and I do think that fear is a tool in the toolbox of people that are trying to control the masses, and that this pendulum is swung back and forth. I think both political parties use fear as a control tactic. But I do think that you can't make a blanket statement as strong as any abstraction that you're afraid of is a bad thing, because I think that's part of the reason why we've gotten into the predicament that we're in, is that we have the ability to discount things in the future and deny things that aren't an immediate danger. And some things, like climate change, if we don't start addressing it, it's going to get worse and worse. And then I'm afraid that when people become in mass aware of the problem, and I think maybe we turned that corner a year or so ago, that people really do understand that we've got a big problem. But I think it will be too late to do anything. Arguably, it may be too late to avoid the worst of it, but I think that we can always make things better. And also, I think that even if you just come to grips with the reality of the situation, then that's going to make things better, because it'll give you more time, give everybody more time to adapt and maybe change their priorities and do more local things. So, I'm all for understanding the reality that we're in and trying to make things incrementally better.
Let's see. So the big question for me, when you talk about we need to do this and we need to do that, is who's we?
We as people, we as the almost 8 billion folks that have, been so successful, our species has been so successful on this planet. And for a long time, we didn't have an effect. And so I think that we still have that mindset that we live in an abundant world, particularly because the Europeans that really got a fresh start when they migrated to North America, and our diseases wiped out so many of the Native Americans that there was just all of this abundance, where we could basically start over, and there was plenty of resources to be used and plenty of environment to handle our waste. But I think it's all of us, and it's going to take all of us to change. But that said, it's definitely the rich people. If you look at the effect on the climate of, just in terms of carbon, it isn't just carbon, but if you just look at the carbon, there's a graph that Kevin Anderson, who I talked to you about, uses a lot. There was a study, Oxfam study, I think, and like 50% of the carbon is from the top 10% of wealthiest people, because they're the ones that fly a lot, they're the ones that drive a lot and have big homes and consume a lot. And the bottom 50% of wealth in the world, they've only contributed 10% of the CO2 that's been added to the atmosphere. So it's really, there's a lot of climate injustice happening as well, environmental injustice.
And yet, when I hear people talking about the problems that need to be addressed, one thing I hear so often is, well, we can't have this cheap air travel. We can't have normal people flying all over the place. But I never hear anybody say, we have to outlaw private jet ownership. Nobody's telling Leonardo DiCaprio or Mel Gibson that they can't fly their personal jets to Ibiza whenever they want to. But it's a problem if I can go, to the Philippines. So my position, I directed you to a radar segment by Sagar Enjeti from Rising today. Did you watch that?
No, I haven't had a chance to look at that. Tell me about it.
Well, in, I think it's Brookline, Massachusetts, there was a total lockdown, and there was a mandate, a local mandate. You couldn't go outside without your mask. And then the CDC changed its recommendations, and the local government changed the conditions of the local mandate to reflect the current CDC guidelines. And the folks at the university there, I think it's the second most educated town in the U.S., they were aghast. They said, no. We absolutely, definitely want, the strictest possible mandate to continue. Why? It's cultural. They hate Trump. They hate people who like Trump. They know that those people don't like wearing the masks, so they want to make everybody wear the mask forever, or at least as long as they can. And the local government, of course, these are the wealthy people in town, These are the local power brokers, and so the local government caved. They rejected the scientific advice of the Centers for Disease Control, and they reverted to a just we hate MAGA stance on masks. And I wrote to you, I said, this radar really is it fully not fully, but it directly addresses my concerns about climate change without actually mentioning climate change. And it is that science says what wealthy, powerful people want it to say officially, and where the pronouncements of some scientific body or another conflict with the political and the social needs of the most powerful people in this society, well, the political and the social needs of the powerful people win out. And they can redefine it. They can call it science, And from my perspective, this is not my perspective, and this is not an opinion. The actions, the policy decisions taken by the U.S. government and by government at all levels, not just the federal government, reflects the needs of the powerful and the wealthy. It does not reflect in any way the needs or the desires or the opinions of the vast majority of voters. And it seems like, and the COVID response absolutely demonstrates this. The only response that the powerful can countenance is a massive immediate transfer of wealth upwards, and then maybe a little something around the sides, to address the actual problem. But any large scale action has to start with further consolidation of resources, further consolidation of wealth by the very few. And at this point, if what we're hearing is so much has to change has to be absolutely fundamental and sweeping across the board in order to deal with this problem. And what I hear is, you have to give us everything, all of your money, all of your property, all of your freedom. You may not go anywhere. You may not have any conversation that is not monitored. You may not gather in any way that is not approved. And you may not express yourself materially or in speech or in media in any way that it is at all threatening to the power and the privilege of an elite few. And they will use climate change and stoke fear over climate change, to carry out the next round of that consolidation of power. And, look at the New York Times. They're spreading fear that, oh my God, there's unfettered conversations happening on the internet. There's this Parler app. There's Signal. What's the one that's only for iPhone, and it's a multi-party audio only environment, but people they join these calls. It's very popular right now, but since I don't have an iPhone, I don't use it. And the mainstream media, they see that, hey, here are spheres where we cannot intrude and enforce our codes of speech conduct on people, and they can say whatever they want, and that's terrible. That's how you get 9/11. That's how Nazis take over, is you let people do what they want and, associate with each other in ways that they want. They can violate all of our, free speech, all of our, correct speech mandates in these environments. So they have to be attacked. And, Google, Facebook, Twitter, they are all more than happy to facilitate that desire on the part of the legacy media to control all speech and to banish people and punish people, get them fired where possible, when they say the things that are not approved. And I see it really on YouTube so much. I go to YouTube and it's showing me all these things that the algorithm thinks that I like, but the second row is all mainstream news stories. It's like, I don't go to YouTube. I've never, ever, ever clicked on an MSNBC story on YouTube, and yet they show it to me every single time I log in. I go to YouTube to see what people are offering up, not corporations, not Fox News, not CNN, for God's sake. I never want to see CNN on YouTube, and yet Google puts that in my face every time I go there. And so, when it comes to climate change, if it requires massive coordinated action, we are not prepared to do it. We are not in a position where we can, in good conscience, give over the sorts of power that would be required to coordinate global human action to address this problem. I think we have to fix our oligarchy problem before we can take huge, sweeping, programs like that.
I would agree. I would agree with that.
Yeah. So, that's got to be the first order of business. Go ahead.
So, I saw the scary side of the nationalism around Trump, and my neighbors here in Kansas, by and large.
Say the name again of your town.
Tonganoxie.
Tonganoxie. Yeah, that's quite the thing to type into GPS.
You can call it Tongi if you're a local. So, but I also see. And I think Chris Hedges, I don't know, you probably read some Chris Hedges, maybe not as
I find Chris Hedges a little hard to take, but yeah, I know who he is and I know his positions.
Yeah, he wrote a book about Christian fascism a few years ago, and he really makes that point that if we get fascism here, it's going to be wrapped in nationalism, and it's going to not have a brown swastika, but it's going to be wrapped in the American flag and in Christianity. And I see that point, but I also see what you've been describing on the sea realm, for a while, that it could be kind of an eco-fascism. It could be the left that tries to curtail consumption and freedoms in the name of climate change, like you're talking about. And in a way, that's almost scarier, because if you look at history, the real terrible atrocities were the real far left regimes, the Pol Pots of the world. And I'm sure that his ideology, he thought he was doing the right thing and he was making the world a better place. But I think it's scary. So, I'm not real comfortable speaking in public. I'm sort of surprised that I've volunteered, said yes when you asked me to do this live stream.
Well, you do a radio show. That's why I asked.
Yeah, but I did that a couple of years ago because I got so to where I really understood climate change and our loss of biodiversity and a lot of other problems that I think we have. I really think that we're in overshoot. I think we've got too many people. I think you and I disagree on that quite a lot, but I think it's maybe not too many people, but too many people consuming too much. It's the sum of those two things. So I think the world could handle a lot more people if we were permaculture hippies, but handle a lot less if we're yuppie folk who fly to Vegas for the weekend, and drive big vehicles and consume a lot. I think that we're just going to chew up the planet. But anyway, that's the point that I wanted to make. I sent you a link today. You probably haven't had a chance to look at that one either.
Oh, the video? I watched it.
Yeah. Did you watch it? Yeah.
It was very familiar stuff.
Yeah, I think it is. My point of sending that to you is that it seems like a common thing for people to get aware of the problems that we have, and then they want to sound the alarm. And I thought that guy, his name is Raphael Ubal, and UBAL, and he has a YouTube video that he put out a year ago, less than an hour long, with a whole bunch of links, and I thought it was one of the best organized ones and the least fear-mongering, the most awareness generating. That was the word I was searching for before, and that's what I asked. Did you think that video was fear-mongering or awareness promoting? And in my mind, it was about awareness. But I'm in a quandary. I feel like I'm half doomer and half bright green. Because I really want to believe that we can put up more wind turbines and we can burn less fossil fuels and we can start to make things better. But I don't know. I get discouraged just by the sheer numbers in a video like that of everything that's trending so wrong, and it's pretty overwhelming.
So, Raphael Ubal, I don't know, what his nationality is. Clearly, he's not a native English speaker. His English is perfectly serviceable. I mean, I'm not criticizing him, but he does have a thick accent, which is, it's not super accessible. And then, yeah, he's using a lot of graphs, a lot of numbers. If you're trying to make it real, his presentation is not making it real. It's pushing it further into the abstract. And then I don't know if you really realize it or if Raphael realizes it, but there's a lot of woke signaling going on in that video. A lot of repetition of the, people are bad, people are greedy, trying to make people feel guilty for their lifestyles. I hear about the huge, the Pacific gyre, this Texas size mat of microscopic plastic particles. And, every time I hear it, it seems as though whoever's bringing it up is pointing a wagging finger at, the United States in particular. But the United States contributes a minuscule amount of plastic to that huge Pacific gyre. You can go to YouTube and type in dumping trash into rivers, and you will see dump trucks backing up to the Amazon River. And, in in Brazil, or you can find them backing up to the Yellow River in Ecuador, and just routinely, I mean, that's where they take the trash. They drive the trash trucks to the street, they pick up the trash, they drive to the river, and they dump it in the river. And all those plastic bags go floating down the river. That's not happening in the U.S. So I mean, this is a complicated issue. Whose responsibility is it to fix this? Because if you ask China or if you ask the global South, they'll say, well, look, this atmospheric concentration of carbon that we have right now is a result of you guys and Britain, you guys, burning fossil fuels for 100 years during the Industrial Revolution and getting rich, and colonizing the planet. And now we're just getting started. And you want us to cut back? No, I think you guys need to cut back. But as you say, atmospheric carbon is not the only thing. And if you look at the US, if you look at Europe, if you look at Japan, South Korea, to some extent China, although China is very, still they're going full steam ahead. And while they make noises about being green and clean, they're also building lots of new coal-fired power plants. But if you look at the places that folks on the left like to demonize, primarily the United States, we're moving really quickly toward decarbonization and energy transition, getting off fossil fuels. I think a lot of fossil fuels are going to be left in the ground, which are completely accessible.
I agree.
So
I don't know. Have you ever tuned into the Energy Transition show?
Sure.
That was a spin-off of the Extra Environmentalist, your friends that you used to interview back in the day.
I don't pay for it, but I take in all their free content. They're a freemium show like mine, but they have a lot more behind the paywall than I do.
Yes. So they put out a show twice a month, and they have the abridged version for free, which is generally like the first 15 or 20 minutes.
Yep.
And then, if you want to get the rest of the conversation, you have to subscribe. Yeah. So actually, Justin Ritchie was a guest once, and they talked about business as usual. I thought it was really interesting. That show has done quite a long series on the science of climate change. And obviously, Chris Nelder, the host, he's a bright green guy. He kind of is trying to counteract the doom and the throwing up your hands and we can't do anything. And he's always pointing out that, and particularly in that episode with Cheston, that business as usual is not really represented by the IPCC's RPC 8.5. And that assumes that we've got more fossil fuels probably than there are even available to get out of the ground and be energy positive. But to your point, we're stopping using coal because it's just not economical compared to solar panels and battery storage. And yeah, that we're going to cause some environmental problems.
Really, we're cutting back on coal because it's not economical compared to natural gas, which we have an enormous amount of due to horizontal drilling.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing that Art Bierman, the guy that kind of you took umbrage with because he kind of gave you a cheap shot on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
He analyzes how fast those wells decline and how many are being drilled. And it's just like a mathematical certainty that we're going to have shortages of natural gas in the future because they have not done the drilling. Now, it's not to say that the prices couldn't go up or the economics couldn't go up or we couldn't subsidize it in a different way and drill that again. But a lot of that, I think, and James Howard Kunstler makes this point all the time, it was just a kind of a scam. It wasn't a profitable thing. I think Dmitry Orlov says, we spent $1 billion to extract $1 million worth of oil, and that was all done through the financialization of the investments and such. So I think, natural gas, yeah, that is competitive now, but it could go away. It's a competitive advantage.
Well, what I hear a lot from folks in the peak oil community, I mean, I hear them representing the technology of shale drilling as if it was still 2008. And yeah, at the very beginning, it was a very, material intensive process. and wells did deplete very quickly. But, you know, artificial intelligence is getting applied to everything these days, including to the seismic surveying that they do to find out exactly where to drill. And they've discovered that they can, not have to drill a whole new well, but just drill at a slightly different horizontal, below the existing wellhead, and get lots and lots of new gas out of it. And, the proof of this is just in the price of natural gas. It's basically free. It's so cheap that, if you're drilling for oil and you find natural gas instead, you just flare it. You just set it on fire and let it burn rather than try to collect it, because, it's not a very compact material. It takes up a lot of space. And if you don't have a pipeline built, it's not valuable enough to bring in tanker trucks or, to try to capture it in a way other than to put it into a pipeline and send it somewhere.
The complexity of the fossil fuel industry is the fact that when you distill a barrel of oil is 42 gallons of oil as it's pumped out of the ground. But you don't just get one thing out of that. You get 19 gallons of gasoline and 10 gallons of diesel and 4 gallons of jet fuel. And so when you go through something like a pandemic, or even something that's a planned kind of slowing down of that economy, we're going to have to figure things like that out, and we may have to go in the short term. We may have to, as we get more passenger vehicles that are run by lithium batteries and electric, we may have to use that gasoline to do other things, to run our ocean-going ships instead of diesel fuel.
Can you do that? I don't know that that's even possible.
Oh, it would take a complete change out of the engines.
Yeah, better to run them on hydrogen then.
Yeah, I mean, but the point I'm making is that we may have to make a plan to do that. And that's the same thing with fracking. I mean, when we frack that oil, we don't get the same product that you get when you drill an oil well that's the light sweet crude that like we used to get in Texas. So you get a lot of natural gas, and that's what's made the price so low. And it's overwhelmed our supply chain. We're trying to get the other things. We're trying to get the stuff that we can then blend to make gasoline, but we're getting all of that natural gas that we don't have the pipelines to handle. And so, like you said, which is better than leaking it off, because its effect on the environment is much worse if you let it escape without at least burning it. But
let me make a couple observations. Twice now, I've talked about the state of natural gas production, and because it is accessed through this process called fracking. Twice now, I've made a point about natural gas, and you have used the fracking connection to turn it into a conversation about oil. The fracking doesn't pay for itself, but here we are. We've shut down all of these dirty coal burning plants and not lost any electricity generation capability because we've spun up all these natural gas plants. Is that not a win? Is that not a profit? Does that not get factored into, as a civilization, how are we doing in terms of polluting the atmosphere while getting the energy that we need? Maybe there's a disconnect somewhere, and certain companies have gone bankrupt, but the people who run those companies, they just start new companies. They go right back into the same field and they keep at it. It's not like the Texas oil scene is withering on the vine, or even places where there's not conventional, because there is conventional crude still coming out of the ground in Texas. So maybe Texas is not a great example. Somebody in the chat has asked, have you read the book Shrinking the Earth: The Rise and Decline of Natural Abundance by Donald Worster?
I have not.
Okay. Well, somebody thought they recognized this author's views. I see you're writing it down, which is good. So last name, yeah. Worster, Worster.
I've read a lot of Ugo Bardi. He's written a book called Extracted. I haven't read his book Extracted. Recently, I watched some videos of a man named Chris Clugston, who has a book out called Blip, and he's really done a lot of research into not just oil, but minerals and metals and all of these non-renewable things and how we're using those up. So
I interviewed Chris Clugston way back when the Sea Realm podcast was in double digits.
did you?
Yeah,
I'll have to look
a long
that one
time
up.
ago.
Is it still available?
I don't think so. No, most of the archive is not available anymore.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah. Well, I wanted to go back to the point that you made. So, yeah, natural gas, arguably, it is cleaner than coal. And it's better than coal in that I believe you get more energy for the amount of pollution you create with natural gas than you would with coal.
Even with the cleanest brand of coal. I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of coal.
Yeah, and like in Germany, they're now burning the brown coal, which is really terrible environmentally. But the bottom line is we've got to quit burning hydrocarbons. I mean, that distillation process that I'm talking about, it's just carbon and hydrogen. And if it's one carbon molecule, there's 4 hydrogens, and that's methane, that's natural gas. Mm-hmm. And then if it's 2, it's ethane and butane and propane. And when it gets to 8, it's gasoline, and when it's in the 12 carbons, it's diesel fuel, but it's all just the same. And when you burn it, it makes heat, it makes water, and it makes carbon dioxide. And it's insidious because you don't see that.
Brent, we lost you now. So just keep talking, and I'll tell you when we can hear you again. So while we're waiting for Brent to come back, Ben Rubber says the larger contribution of plastic in the ocean is a third world country who lacks any plastic recycling infrastructure or mindset. Chris Smahe, I think it is, Smaje, stated in his book, The Small Farm Future. Apparently, continues Ben Rubber, the 10th heavily populated river catchments in Africa and Asia are responsible for 90% of the plastic in the ocean, according to a study from 2017. Let's see. Christian Schmidt. Export of plastic debris by rivers into the sea in the Journal of Environmental Science and Technology. They just don't have an effective waste collection system. All right. Can't find Extracted. Can you spell out the author? So I think the author he's talking about is Ugo Bardi. And his name is UGO. It's his first name, last name BARDI. It's from Chelsea Green Publishing.
Can you hear me now, Ken?
Yes.
Am I back?
Yes, although can't see you.
Yeah, I'm going to leave my video off. I'm not that good looking anyway. I'm using a cell phone. Part of living in the country by Tonganoxie is a lack of internet. So I may put the $99 down for Starlink if that works out. I've got some friends that are testing it on the beta list.
Anyway, let's talk about Elon Musk for a minute, because I know that maybe led by John Michael Greer, but I don't know that everybody. I don't think all Doomers read John Michael Greer. He's not as accessible as some other authors. But I've noticed that folks in the peak oil community and anti-tech folks and hippies generally really, really hate Elon Musk. They don't just disapprove of his projects. They don't just, not like him or not support him. They loathe him. And here you are talking about Starlink, one of his projects to make high-speed internet available to everybody around the globe, regardless of whether you live in a big urban area or not. What are your thoughts on Elon Musk?
I've heard you say that a lot.
I get that a lot.
Negative. well, I've heard you make that point before, and I have not seen it so much. So my oldest son is quite a techno utopian person. Mm-hmm. He thinks that we are going to mine the stars and solve all of our problems through technology. And he's got a good job, and he's got, they bought a Tesla. And so, good on him, for that. But, I'm not negative about Musk. I think he's done a lot of great stuff. I think he's a visionary guy, and he's got enough showmanship that he gets people believing in it to where his stock rises, and then he has the money to make stuff happen. Starlink, it'll be a shame if we can't see the stars because of all of the light pollution orbiting space, but that's my only concern about it. And if
I can't see the stars now. I mean, it's
yeah. Hey, I started to make a point about the insidiousness of gasoline. Did that come through, or did I get cut off?
I think that's where you faded. So go ahead and repeat that point.
Yeah. So a gallon of water roughly weighs 8 pounds because it's got oxygen and it's a heavier molecule. A gallon of gasoline weighs about 6 pounds. But of that 6 pounds, about 5 pounds of that is the carbon. It's a heavier molecule than the hydrogen, 12 times heavier. And so if you took a gallon of gasoline and then you somehow could take the carbon dioxide that was created and convert that to liberate the oxygen, so that could go back into the atmosphere, and then just retain the carbon, which is basically what you do through a biochar process or something. But that amount of carbon, if it was in the form of a pencil lead, graphite, it would be 4 inches cubed. So a cube 4 inches by 4 inches by 4 inches for every gallon of gasoline that we burn. But that's dissolved like a sugar cube in a glass of iced tea into the atmosphere. You put this into your car, you pay for it, and it just moves you down the road and magically disappears. But it's not magically disappearing, it's going into the atmosphere and really causing a huge problem. And I'm convinced that we're going to have to figure out how to withdraw some of that carbon out of the atmosphere. We cannot let it get to a thermal equilibrium at the level that it's at, because that's going to take several hundred years maybe for that to reach equilibrium. But even at the level that we're at now, that's going to make the seas rise and the temperatures rise and really cause a problem for habitat and for human habitation, because we have so many people on the coast, and for our ability to grow food at scale. And so I still believe that we are going to have some technology come along, and we're going to address this problem. I always like that point that Sean Michael Greer made in his Archdruid Report blog, that the doomers tend to, and the people, he didn't call them doomers, his dichotomy was the people that believe in perpetual progress as a religion and the people that believe in apocalypse. Mm-hmm. He always eschews dichotomies of all kinds. He's always looking for the third option, and I think that's part of his sort of makeup. But the people that that I would call doomers, they I've lost my train of thought, Camo. Where was I going?
Well, I think maybe I don't know if I'm outing you by saying this, but you've put a lot of stock in what are thus far unproven new energy technologies. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I do.
I thought I caught a passing reference to it. I thought maybe you were teeing yourself up to talk about that.
Well, yeah. So no, I think before we go there, I think I remember what I was talking about.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think that we've got to figure out how to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, because at current levels, we're going to get very aware of the impacts of climate in short order, I believe. It's interesting, on your MeWe group about a year ago, when it was the turn of the decade, I threw out 3 predictions, and I tried to get other people to do it, but no one else did. It's a pretty independent bunch on MeWe, I think. But one of my predictions that I threw out there and this was for what's going to happen at the turn of 2030, 10 years from now. My number one was that by then, Arctic sea ice is going to almost be gone in the summertime. The Arctic Ocean is floating ice. There's no land at the North Pole. It's just ice, and it's getting thinner and thinner and smaller every year. And it has been since we've been gathering that data. And I think we're on a trajectory that in the next year or next 10 years, it's probably going to, at some September, completely melt away. And then every year it's going to be gone for more of the year. And then maybe by 2050, it could be gone forever until we figure out how to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So that's my kind of belief of where we're headed if things don't change, and probably things aren't going to change fast enough that we're not going to go there anyway.
You know, earlier,
switch to the other subject. Do you want to hear some of my crazy ideas?
On the topic of an ice-free Arctic, I think that both the Pentagon and the Russian military are anticipating that and making plans, you know, to take advantage of the fact that it will be navigable. Even while, you know, Republicans in the U.S. federal government deny that climate change is a thing, you know, the U.S. military, the Pentagon, doesn't deny it, and they're making plans. How about energy generation? So, you know, you say we have to stop. Oh, actually, let me read something from the chat real quick.
Sure.
Benarubber writes, so soil life and trees are the best carbon sequestration technology. I think that's the main disgruntulation of muscators. Other approaches require energy for extraction or energy to transport the carbon rock and the infrastructure to maintain and transport it. Decentralization of the carbon economy seems important. If we require an energy-intensive carbon extraction communism to survive, we're socially screwed. Let me read that again. Decentralization of the carbon economy seems important. If we require an energy-intensive carbon extraction communism to survive, we're socially screwed. And one more from Benarubber. He writes, it's also important to get away from the reductive analysis of climate change.
Yeah.
Did any of that grab your attention?
Well, I completely agree that we need to use biological methods foremost.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, though, that people tend to just boil that down to trees. And I don't think that we should, I think we should reforest, but I don't think we should afforest where trees aren't native, you know, that aren't the thing that should be there. I think like in Kansas, we should have prairie. And so we could have prairie that was sequestering a lot more carbon if we changed how we did our agriculture. And there are lots of people that are looking at those ideas. And then there are others. This segue is a segue into kind of technology solutions. One of my engineering heroes is a Dane named Henrik Stiesdal. And he is retired now. He got to be the head technology person with Siemens with the wind energy, and he did a lot of the development of wind turbines and making them mass producible and successful from an engineering point of view. And now he's got this company, and he's got several things that he's looking at. One of them is a grid scale energy storage system that stores energy in rock as heat, but then you can extract it back out. But another idea that he has is a way to make jet fuel using, essentially it's like biochar. So it's taking agricultural waste like the chaff from wheat or the corn stalks, and instead of just burning that off like we would a pasture here in Kansas, or baling it into straw, you could make it into a biochar product by putting it through a pyrolysis process. And this would be a big plant that would do this. But you can get then enough carbon, and then you can get enough hydrogen in a green way from using electrolysis from wind turbines, for instance, or solar panels. Then that can be combined, and you can make jet fuel that could then allow us to still fly, but the whole process is carbon negative. it pulls a little bit more carbon out of the atmosphere than it generates. And I think it's a really intriguing idea. It augments the idea that, a lot of the permaculture people do. I'm sure your friend Albert Bates is all over this, making biochar. So instead of taking your limbs that fall out of your trees and just burning them in your fireplace, burn them in the absence of oxygen, which is pretty simple to do, and then make char. And then you can either grind that up and amend it with microbes and make your soil healthier, or hell, you can just bury it, and then you've taken some carbon out of the atmosphere. The problem is if you drive your pickup truck around the neighborhood to do that, and you're making those 4-inch cubes of carbon with every gallon that you burn, it's not carbon negative. So it's got to be some localized thing where we really all understand the math of it, the physics of it, and abide by it, and really do our part.
So it seems to me there that the real hurdle is not technological, it's going to be social, in that if we have to be employing a variety of methods to capture and sequester carbon, and those methods are not going to be uniform. We're not going to be transporting things across whole continents to, gather them in one place to do some sort of transformation on them. We need some sort of bookkeeping system, because if it costs you time, effort, and money to do this, you have a strong incentive not to do it. So there needs to be some sort of mechanism for recognizing the sacrifices that people make in order to sequester carbon in whatever means, by whatever means is available to them in their locale, given the materials at hand and the local resources.
Let me make a right turn on that one, Ben. Right. So you have talked with Charles Hugh Smith off and on many times. He seems like he writes a book a year and comes on and talks about most of those with you. One of them, he laid out the idea of basing fiat currency on social good. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a great idea. I really like that. But I've had this idea that, well, for one thing, I think our monetary system is in big trouble. I think we've created so much money that can never be paid back that at some point we may have to just start over with something else. And gold makes more sense than Bitcoin, but that's a different conversation. But here's my idea. Why not do something where we create money based on how much carbon is pulled out of the atmosphere? So we've got a finite amount of carbon. It's huge, but we have a finite amount of carbon in the atmosphere that we want to take out. We're at 415 parts per million. We want to get down to 320, something like that. And so that then would be the basis for what the value of currency is. So I'm looking for some sort of scheme where farmers could amend their soil and get a credit for that, or a person could make biochar and get a credit for that. And then there would be taxes that are the opposite of that. If you're putting carbon into the atmosphere, then you lose that carbon currency. And if you're drawing it out, then you gain that carbon currency. What do you think of that idea?
The question remains, of the bookkeeping, the verification, who certifies it, by what mechanism. I mean, I like Charles Hugh Smith. His plan was basically a reaction to the universal basic income proposal. He thinks it's a bad idea, but what we need is some way for normal people to engage in useful, socially useful activities, which then creates money. He wants the money creation power to be more democratically distributed, but there has to be some mechanism to prove that the work actually got done. And that seems to be, I don't want to say it's the fatal flaw, but, I don't want to assume that it's a hurdle that cannot be overcome, but it does seem to be the obvious hurdle, both in his plan for allowing people to do work that is useful that isn't recognized by the market right now and isn't compensated, and also, for environmental remediation of, a variety of environmental remediations. Again, not just atmospheric carbon, but, habitat protection or restoration, or, breeding Like I know a guy in Tennessee who he breeds heritage breed pigs. You know, these are animals that were very useful to human scale farms in past centuries, but are not so useful to industrial scale, hog farms of today. But the industrial scale hog farms of today are a nightmare. I mean, they're a nightmare for the hogs. They're a nightmare for anybody who lives near them. They have enormous lagoons of pig crap, which, that's what, it smells like for miles around. And, people live in a place, they've lived there for generations, and then along comes a big agribusiness and builds an enormous hog farm half a mile from their house and makes their home unlivable.
Well, big agriculture is kind of a racket too. I mean, the people that grow the chickens and grow the pigs, that they're oftentimes kind of stuck because they can't get ahead because of the rules of the whole business is kind of rigged against them.
The person you mentioned earlier, Heinrich Stiesdal, did you say his name was?
Yeah, Henrik Stiesdal, Stiesdal.
Let's see. Well, we're just about out of time. Let me offer you the last word.
Yeah. So one more thought about the carbon, the money based on carbon. I think the antithesis of that is blockchain. I know you're kind of exploring blockchain, that and I don't really understand that, what you're doing with your art, that there's blockchain behind it. But I think blockchain is evil. I think that it uses way too much currency or too much power to create that distributed ledger. And
so let me just stop you right there and say that is a characteristic of Bitcoin, but it is not a characteristic of cryptocurrencies in general. That's just the Bitcoin's methodology for limiting the amount of currency. A certain amount of computation has to be done in order to mine a Bitcoin. But that's not the only way you can do cryptocurrency. That's not the way, like, for example, Cardano is done. But continue.
Okay. I thought that part of it was the distributed ledger and that everybody is doing the calculation remotely so that everybody knows that the transaction is legitimate.
Yeah, the distributed ledger is definitely a feature of any cryptocurrency, but it's not as energy intensive as the Bitcoin mining process is.
Okay.
Let me offer you 1 minute to wrap it up, and then we do have to go. And I will not interrupt you again.
All right. Well, I don't know. I feel like I've been all over the map and not been very articulate, but hopefully some people got some things out of this. I think that there is a difference between fear-mongering and just promoting awareness. And I'm all about promoting awareness. I like that guy, Raphael Ubal. I really appreciate the information that Nate Hagans puts out. I think Michael Dowd, with his Post-Doom YouTube channel, he puts out some really good stuff. I think he's got a lot of things figured out in this world. So I would encourage people to look at him as well. All right, I know we're close to the time, so.
All right. Well, Brent, it has been good talking to you, and this is not our last conversation. As Jim Kunstler likes to say, we will write again.
All right, thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, everybody. Colin's got to go home.